I know my limitations. I'm okay with it.
That's you, right?
That's right.
You need one?
Whatever.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'll and if I need to, I'll take it. We can share.
At 6:01, we'll call the meeting to order. Tonight, we'll table the minutes for the November the 2nd meeting. And we'll move to subdivision and land development. We'll also skip that.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Can we get a vote on the tabling for the minutes? Staff unfortunately did not have time to prepare them in advance enough that the commission could review.
Okay. All right. So we will go back and we'll give a vote from our commission to table the minutes.
Mr. Chair, I'll move that we table the minutes of November 2nd.
I'll second.
We have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Motion carried. Skipping to B on our agenda. Waiver of formal process for Wickersham Elementary School project. ELA Group Incorporated on behalf of Lancaster School District is requesting a waiver of formal process for installing synthetic turf with fencing, walkway, and ball stopper netting on the athletic field of Wickersham Elementary School.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Sorry to interrupt. I just did want to provide some explanation for agenda item 3A. Just before we move past that, I thought it might be helpful to just provide a couple words as to why we're not hearing that this evening. Willow Valley, this is the developer for the project known as Mosaic at the corner of Vine and South Queen Street. They have requested a technical amendment to the plan that they got approved from the commission earlier this year in July for their 20-story tower, residential tower for retirement community. They have been working with the city to navigate the procedural request in doing that. After review by our solicitor, just in the last couple of days, it was advised that what they've requested this evening would be better done another way. So they have withdrawn that request. I believe that withdrawal letter was distributed to the Planning Commission. And so that they will be coming back with an amended request probably before the end of the year.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Sure.
We'll finish with B. We'll start over again. B, the waiver of the formal process for Wickersham Elementary School project. ELA Group Incorporated on behalf of Lancaster School District is requesting a waiver of formal process for installing synthetic turf with fencing, walkway, and ball stopper netting onto the athletic field of Wickersham Elementary School. The scope of the project meets the requirement of no impact land development except for stormwater, which will be submitted separately under large stormwater application.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Hugh Cadzo. I'm from ELA Sport, which is part of ELA Group. And with me tonight, we have, you want to introduce yourselves?
Director of Operations, School District.
And the school
Is
district,
your mic on? It doesn't appear to. Okay. Doesn't.
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Thank you. We're live streaming all the meetings, so for those at home who can't be in the room, they need our microphones. Thank you.
understood. Okay, and as set forth, this is explained by Mr. Polite's introduction to it. What this is a project, currently wrapping up construction at the Wickersham Elementary. Behind the elementary school for years has been sport fields. At one time it was softball and a soccer field, and now it's been converted over to a grass soccer field as part of the construction for Wickersham. About 2-3 years ago, to put this in context, we had prepared a feasibility study just before the pandemic hit for the school district, taking a look at their athletic facilities, the grass fields, the stadium, the softball field, things like that, to check how everything is with the sense of ADA access, Title IX issues, field design, conditions of fields, et cetera, field usage. And part of that study was renovations to the stadium and a renovation to this field here behind Wickersham to look at the possibility of using synthetic turf. And as it's been going with the district at this time, this was always viewed as being the first phase of the renovations for any of the athletic facilities. Primarily, one of the main purposes for this, with the amount of grass fields and the condition of some of the grass fields and the usage, was to give the ability to give some of the fields, particularly behind McCaskey East, a chance to rest so they're not continually used and abused. So, like I said, this is essentially the phase one of the project. Meeting with staff and reviewing the ordinance, pretty much as outlined in our letter. We really don't meet any of the criteria except for the stormwater. So we've asked for a waiver from this process. And to kind of explain what you see up on the screen, people in the audience here and in the board, and I don't know, I don't want to have everyone have to crook their necks, but what we have here is, this is an overall sketch plan where you see on the upper part, we have what's shown as future restrooms and future press box for the field, which is not going to be built at this time. This is a future phase. It actually will be tied into what is done with the stadium, which is a few years down the road. Is unknown the timeline for that, because in order to come up with what would be needed here, the programming for the stadium building renovations would have to be done prior to this here. So from a stormwater standpoint, we, in talking with staff, and what we normally will do in this situation, was any stormwater design for this field will also include that area there in the stormwater calculations. So at the time, when the time comes that if the school district does proceed to put anything here, those stormwater facilities will be accommodated to handle what you see there. This is going to be a straight soccer field, hockey field, possibility of the football team using it. The school district contemplates it will be public usage. What they want to reach out and coordinate with the city and to see how this will fit in the overall plan of recreational facilities in the city. So this is the first time that the district would have something like this, and it's something that they will need to investigate and look into. And any questions you may have, that's why we have representatives from the school district here tonight. So again, it's a relatively simple project. I mean, it's turfing an existing soccer field. It'll be fenced because normally these facilities are fenced. Access will be worked out for the public, but you never want to have these wide open to the public because people do things to for such an investment in such a facility like this. You don't want people taking ATVs or mini bikes or bikes or anything and going through and potentially damaging it. So, did you get the overall campus? I sent it. I thought I sent it to you. Do you have the access to that?
Mandela? Only that one. Okay.
That one right there.
The one that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to. All right. What this is showing this is showing is essentially the overall campus as it is. This is prior existing conditions plan. That was the field. In the lower corner here, you actually have the land that's currently completed on construction. And this soccer field is shifted towards where you so that's why this field originally was the your plan platform. You see it on both sides and on the screen. But now it has shifted because of the construction of the Wickersham parking lot. So that's why it's located where it is right now. So, okay. That's pretty much straightforward. There's not much more to get into. I mean, we're going to meet the stormwater requirements as set forth in the city. So, and we're well versed as in things in the city. Cheryl Love, you probably all you don't see me here. You usually see Cheryl here or Liz. So, but yeah, if you have any questions, we're here to answer.
Thank you.
I have a question regarding just more for educational purposes and potentially a follow-up depending on what your answer is. But tell me a little bit about the benefits of the synthetic turf over just a regular grass surface.
The regular grass turf is, depending on the quality of the construction of it, there's various levels of construction. It's pretty much your standard school field, which is just like your front lawn. Then you may have sub-drainage, and then a higher level field would have sub-drainage and irrigation. In this particular case here, many of these fields do not have irrigation and have to be continually repaired. And what happens with the usage, they get worn, get divoted, get uneven, get unsafe. And so over time, the maintenance to really properly do a grass field is just not in the budget. You have to resod it. You have to, ideally construct, if you can do, like have a game field, but rarely it's in the budget. With a synthetic turf field, you can have many more events, where like a high-quality grass field, kind of a rule of thumb is 100 events a year. Synthetic turf could have, if it has lights or whatnot, could have up to 1,000. So this could be used a lot more. During a rain event, they could be out here playing. I coach sports, high school sports at Hempfield, and it's always all it takes is one youth football team on a rainy Saturday morning to go out and practice. The field is destroyed, and then then it makes it unplayable for everybody else, and that's kind of been a concern because some of the facilities here are definitely, you just can't keep up.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you.
So I assume they're safer as they developed it over the years, this synthetic turf,
Yeah,
in terms of injury.
Yeah, they over the years, the very first ones is like years ago at the vet or like Three Rivers, it was basically concrete with rug on top. Now with the system, what they've done is a rubber infill system. The GMAX testing, and they're always forever trying to mimic. They're trying to mimic what the grass is like. Properly maintained fields are easy. They're easy to maintain. You still have to maintain them. Like hot spots and gold mounds and things like that, but it's a lot easier than having to, redo grass. But right now, the situation, there is some of the NFL players complaining, but that's a whole different upper level of sports, and a lot of that, and right now it's kind of they've been down that road before with this, and you're playing at such a higher level, that even, and the injuries on grass are comparable, but it's just, I think, right now it just happens to be the hot button topic at the moment. But yeah, they have definitely, the biggest issue we always see is actually not with the turf itself, it's with concussions. As a coach, is concussions are the issues. It's not always necessarily hitting the turf, it's how they tackle, how they do, and that's the biggest concern, which get yelled at by many parents because we take kids out, but I rather they're be able to think later in life. It's more important.
I have a question about the water runoff. Is it fully non-porous, or is there some level?
All right, to explain this, the way the system is constructed is there is a stone bed underneath the field. on average 6 to 8 inches of open graded, like 57 stones, which are, they're free-flowing stones. And on the top, there'll be a narrow layer of fine stones that will kind of lock it so you can grade it. And what normally with these types of systems, and probably what's going to happen here is that they'll be would be towards the Wickersham side of the school, of the field. There'll be an underground stone basin of some sort, probably similar to what's been constructed at Wickersham. And there, the water will infiltrate down, and there'll be an outlet structure to control it. So it'd be an underground facility. These if on average, will be like 20 inches an hour. They'll flow. They'll be free flowing. There shouldn't be any ponding water on them at all. That's the whole purpose with them. So and actually with DEP, for years, and I think it still applies. I may be, I know Liz is actually our engineer who's been working on this. Has noted DEP actually classifies these as filtration because you're going through stone, you're going through fabric, you're going through a sand mix, so it actually applies towards your water quality to a limited degree.
Are you going to be using crumb rubber from tires in this synthetic field?
We haven't discussed that as of yet. There are alternative infills out there. You can have organics, which is really not recommended up in this part of the country because organics help retain water and freeze, and you end up basically having a frozen field that's unusable and not safe. There are other types of EPDM rubber that's manufactured and coated sands and things like that. So we really haven't discussed exactly what we're contemplating with the infill.
Thank you.
I just want to follow up to the water infiltration question. Would that count as a stormwater BMP for the project or no?
It's not a full BMP. It helps towards the numbers that you need to achieve for water quality. So bottom line will be, what the underground, the structure that we end up, building for this. So it helps, but it's not a be all end all.
Well, this is an exciting project for the kids. I have 2 SDOL students, so I know my son would have loved to have a turf field. He went to Wharton, both my kids went to Wharton Elementary, and we're now into McCaskey and Reynolds.
So I see that this is multi-use for at least soccer and field hockey. What other sports might be played here? This is more for curiosity's sake.
You could, the size of the field will allow, like, if lacrosse, if this district has a lacrosse club or something like that. It's of a size the football team could practice on it. They wouldn't play on it. Any youth sports teams could play on it. If there's a Quidditch group in the city, they could play on it. So it'll be multi-sport.
Okay. I was just curious because you had mentioned how it sounds like in the future we can expect the stadium where football does play to eventually be renovated.
Yeah, and that'd be years down the road. I mean, we've looked at it. We've been working on and off for the school district for about 20 years on their various master plans and with the stadium. And the issue there, if you're all familiar with it, it was built back, WPA built probably back in the 30s. My dad had played at that field in the 40s, way back when. And the field size is not big enough to properly fit a field. So modifications would have to happen to the grandstands. And actually the way it's constructed, it will allow that.
Okay.
But there's a lot of things internally because this district needs to program what they want to put in there for the kids. And
Sure.
Right now it's kind of like, all right, we're putting that on the back burner and we're focusing on this right now.
Okay. And then I guess to stick to the stormwater issue, because that really is what you came here for.
Mhm.
Compared to the conditions of the current field, how much is this projected to increase our ability to manage? What is the current condition and what will it projected to be?
The stormwater, the CN numbers and stuff for the synthetic turf, it isn't impervious, but it's not meadow. So there is an increase based off of those calculations. So And the one thing with this right now, I mean, actually the Wickersham Drive, there have been problems for years where the runoff was coming, I can't remember the name of the road across the street. Water was coming across and
Lehigh?
wash. Is that Lehigh? Yeah. Was washing down, straight down the street, across the softball field and down into the baseball field, and actually eroding, the softball field would totally erode away.
Okay.
So Wickersham actually, when that drive came in as part of that project, they fixed that issue there. So right now, everything right here is actually going off on the surface. So now it'll be controlled and contained underneath, and then released into the system. So it's pretty much, if it falls on it, it's going through the system and stored. Where right now you have a runoff that's going, it's actually, I think the project has a swale now. The Wickersham project has a swale carrying water this way now. It's pretty much, that's staying. That's not going to be removed. And then everything here pretty much goes straight through in a pipe.
Okay, so it prevents runoff, is what you're saying?
It pretty much catches
Gotcha.
everything.
And then I guess, so in just very simple terms, what is the benefit of this stormwater-wise as opposed to a natural grass field?
One thing, you don't have to put fertilizers on it.
Okay.
That's a big thing. And you don't have to irrigate it, so you're not using water for that. So those are the two biggest items that you have with it, that you're not introducing those chemicals into the water. And what you have here with these synthetic turf surfaces, for a couple of years, there was a concern about growth and what happens, what could happen in there because there was the staph issues where people were getting cuts, and it wasn't, nothing grows in this. And so it's not, and the problem is, if there is a problem, is that synthetic turf is a little more abrasive, slightly more abrasive. And speaking from experience as a coach, kids nowadays don't believe in taking showers or washing themselves. So it's just they hit one another and they get something in their cut, and then next thing you know, they have issues. So
Oh yeah, no, I remember playing soccer on these fields, and we would trash them. So
yeah.
so I guess the only question I have is, does this plan potentially increase any demand on the rest of the stormwater system for the city, or reduce it?
No, it's going to be pretty much self-contained, and it'll meet the city requirements. I mean, everything you see is going to be within the boundaries of that curb area. So
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Just for the commission's benefit, I'll just add this will still need to go through stormwater approvals and design. City staff is recommending an approval of this modification request or waiver request, and certainly see the benefit. This project doesn't include a lot of the typical land development features that you would often see, new building footprint, the need for sidewalks, curbs, street trees, those are already provided here. And lighting, I believe, is to be determined for this field, but there's already site lighting and a variety of other amenities for pedestrians and vehicles. So,
Any public comment? Hearing none.
Can I make a motion to approve the waiver of formal process for Wickersham Elementary School project?
I second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Oppose? Hearing none, ayes have it, motion carried.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Number 4, Redevelopment Authority of the City of Lancaster, RACL. Planning Commission recommendation of approximate land use for the following properties. Number 1, 247, 249 North Queen Street. Should I do these one at a time?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to suggest that the commission consider both number 1 and number 2 together. These two properties, 247 to 249 and 251 to 253 North Queen Street, are directly adjacent, and in fact, they really function as a single building. The foundation is built as one building, supports both of these parcels. I think we would need to take action just for that to happen if the commission is amenable to it.
Would you like a motion for that? Yes. Okay. Then I would like to make a motion that we do consider combining number 1 and number 2 for recommendation of appropriate land use for 247 to 249 North Queen Street and 251 and 253 North Queen Street together.
I'll second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Ready for the vote? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Ayes have it, motion carried.
So many of you probably know the property that we're referring to, Puff and Stuff Kebab Station, and the residential units above. I believe there are 7 residential units on the upper floors, and there are 2 distinct commercial spaces here that are rented separately. The history here really is that there is severe structural problems with this, primarily foundation, but there are other issues as well. At this point, city inspectors are concerned to go into the property, and it needs to be evaluated by a structural engineer for repairs to take place. Permits have not moved forward. Work has not been completed to remedy the conditions of blight, given the safety issue and it being in a prominent downtown location. The city remains concerned about the condition of the properties. So city staff in this case is recommending that it continue as a mixed use on site. So the commission's task this evening on all 4 of these properties is to consider a recommendation of use to the redevelopment authority. That will set the parameters for their public RFP process, their request for proposals for redevelopment of the properties if and when they are taken by eminent domain. So given that there are commercial storefronts already there and 7 residential units above, it's a great downtown mixed-use building that would be nice to see continue. Happy to answer questions.
I think we've been through this one before. I don't have anything to say about it.
We have. This was a condemnation I think we issued in September, October. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move to approve the first 2 combined. From the,
We'll just ask for any public comment.
oh, sorry.
Any public comment? Now we can set it.
I move we approve the redevelopment authority's recommendation on land use for 247, 249 North Queen Street and 251, 253 North Queen Street.
Mr. Boehm, just to clarify, we'll be making the recommendation to the redevelopment authority for the use. Did you want to concur with the mixed use recommendation?
Yes, I apologize.
Thank you.
And I will second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it, motion carried.
Okay. So 211 Coral Street, this is another property the Planning Commission condemned. And this one is a single-family home, and I think it would be appropriate for it to continue being a single-family home. This is approximately at the intersection of Coral and Second, just a little bit down the block. And unfortunately, the landowner has been completely unresponsive still. So with your recommendation for residential, it would go to the redevelopment authority for eminent domain and then public sale.
Is it the red one?
Yes, it's the red one.
Okay.
So I sit on the Reinvestment Authority Board, and this property is blighted and it's unsafe, and it needs to continue along the process.
My only question is, Douglas, would this property be eligible for any commercial modifications because it's on like a sort of corner of the block? I don't know if that's considered a corner lot or not.
Wouldn't be a corner lot. There are some limited commercial uses that would be permitted in the R3 district, but they would be permitted by special exception by the zoning hearing board. And certainly home work situations as well would be permitted in the R3, depending on what they are.
Whose parking lot is that beside it? I see a logo there on the sign. Okay, an apartment parking lot.
Yeah, dial, yeah.
I mean, I think since it's already configured as a single-family home, that's obviously like the most straightforward thing to do with it, but it would be interesting if somebody had some sort of light commercial recommendation for it, that they be able to enact it there. But that's really all I have to say.
Any other comment from the commission? Any public comment? Hearing none. We're ready for the vote.
Do you need a motion?
Motion, yeah.
May I make a motion to, from the Planning Commission would like to recommend to the Redevelopment Authority of the City of Lancaster that 211 Coral Street be considered as residential in nature.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to 11 Coral Street. Ready for the vote? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none, ayes have it, motion carried. .522 Beaver Street.
So this property has actually been condemned since October of '21, and staff have been in touch with the landowner, but have been unable to get permits pulled and have the project move forward. I'm told that this one is also suffering from some structural issues. And I did have a conversation with someone about demolition, but ultimately, because things haven't been remedied, it's continuing through the process and is back to us for a use recommendation. This is a wide lot. It's probably a triple wide lot, or maybe compared to the neighboring properties. I think, again, residential is the use that city staff is recommending here. Oftentimes I'm using residential in a broad sense because there may be properties that could stand to have more than one unit on them. This is one that could see additional development, but I think keeping the recommendation broadly residential would provide, I think, helpful flexibility to the redevelopment authority when they go through a request for proposals process.
Douglas, for this, would we, if we were considering something like multifamily, would that still be residential? Would that have to be earmarked differently?
It would not need to be, no.
And you wouldn't consider this parcel for mixed-use purposes? Just to open up the opportunities a little bit?
Well, I think on this particular block, given that it's solidly residential, I'd be reluctant to recommend a commercial use on the ground floor in the neighborhood. I think if the commission wanted to be more liberal with the recommendation, we could potentially suggest, residential or a use otherwise consistent with, or generally consistent with the zoning ordinance. That way we're not locking someone into something. I think that would be perfectly fine too. I mean, those would all be by right uses. I say generally consistent because I want to make sure to include special exceptions in that. I guess we could say generally, yeah, I think generally consistent is probably good enough. As you know, a lot of businesses in the R3 district require special exceptions. So if we say, strictly consistent, I'm just concerned about how that would be interpreted.
Do you know if what would, I'm thinking of a daycare, and I'm thinking that,
Hmm.
oh, there's one right there. Okay, maybe that, because there's one right around the corner, never mind. But anyway, that was my thought for the mixed-use purpose, because I thought that would that then in fact allow like residential above and a daycare center below?
It could. The challenges there are mostly within building codes, and the separation of uses can become exorbitantly expensive for small projects. Not to say it's impossible, but that becomes challenging. So apartments are permitted in the R3 district. I'd have to check if that's by right or special exception. But apartments as explicitly defined as 2 units above a commercial use. So you could have that in this instance.
What's are we able to see it from Alley 80, or does Google Map not provide us that?
Mandeli, are you able to see it from the alley side? The main structure sits on Beaver Street, but there's I think a parking garage. Yeah, okay, it's not allowing us to look from the alley. There is a small parking structure at the back. I don't know the condition of that. It's the residential building that's, really been the one receiving most of the violations from what I understand. Looks like
Okay.
Mandeli can maybe pull up an oblique view and take a look at that.
I only ask because, I think that buildings being able, or rather properties being able to be flexible in use is something I prefer personally. But I don't feel like the structure itself is large enough to really accommodate more than one use. It at least looks like a really small house. But if somebody were to raise the site and provide access to parking through the back, I could see it being more commercial in nature. I just know Beaver Street is very narrow. So for people to use it for a commercial use on the front side could be problematic.
Sure. And just to clarify, whatever use we recommend, we're not locking anyone into using these buildings per se. They would need to go through a development process. The next step here, I'll play it out just so you can kind of see the complete picture. The use recommendation goes to the redevelopment authority. That allows them to close on taking the property. When they have it, they issue a request for proposals that may set certain parameters. For instance, we're looking for proposals that, of course, meet the recommendation from you, residential and generally consistent with zoning. But there may also be language in there about, looking for proposals that may include affordable housing and other community amenities or community benefit missions. And then it would really be up to the developer to make a pitch for, we propose knocking all of these down, and here's how we would do it, and this is the building we would put there. And then it's up to the redevelopment authority members to make a decision on those applications. I do sit on a review committee with other staff that looks at all of those proposals just for general feasibility for zoning and land development issues.
Any other questions from the commission? Any public comment? Okay, do we have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I would like to make a motion that the Planning Commission recommend the appropriate reuse of 522 Beaver Street as residential.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second for 522 Beaver Street. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Hearing none, ayes have it, motion carried. Number 5, comprehensive plan update.
I don't have an update prepared for this evening. We've had some good discussion on this in past meetings. I'm happy to answer any questions, and maybe I'll just briefly say, in case I didn't mention in previous meetings, we've concluded the majority of our first two, well, we've concluded all of the first two phases of our community outreach. We've reached almost 4,500 people through those outreach initiatives. Those are all direct conversations or surveys or interactions that we had with residents. So we're extremely excited by the robust community outreach process that we've had, and thank you to any of you who did show up at an event or volunteer. So from here, we're helping write the plan. So that's what we're trying to focus on. We're not going to be attending a lot of community events or doing outreach over the next 4 or 5 months. We are seeking a venue and a date to celebrate the plan and announce it to the community and get feedback once we have that all in draft form. That'll be sometime in early May. So between now and then, we'll just be hard at work, kind of hunkering down and trying to get some of this on paper. So yeah, any questions? Happy to fill you guys in more if you need.
So I get a sense of what the process is then. A draft is being worked on, and then it comes to us, and do we as commissioners propose changes to it? Like what?
So it will be presented to you in draft form. We'll likely have multiple meetings about it. I don't imagine this is something we can swallow all at one time, but we'll take bites at this. And I want to spend time with you all, really unpacking what's in the document. There will be a set of policies. There will be a future land use map. And there will likely be redevelopment areas that are noted. Eventually, we will have an official map as well that identifies, future community facilities that we may need to build out, roads, schools, other sorts of things where we can reserve land. And so, yeah, that'll take place across several sessions. The city's interested in focusing on the Planning Commission as the main public engagement process for the plan. So we've done a lot, we've done door knocking and community events and all kinds of things. What we're really moving into a little bit more of a formal process from here, and the Planning Commission is going to play a key role in serving as that venue for public discourse on what's being proposed in the plan. Hopefully at some point, maybe with conditions or recommendations for changes, you would all recommend that to council for approval, and then it would go to city council for additional discussion and a final vote. We're hoping that that's done sometime in summer of 2023.
Yeah. Okay, so we basically do a large chunk of this, and then could you clarify for me the role that council plays? Do they just vote the final draft, the final version, and that makes it official then?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep. And there could be edits between the time that you all recommend and when council looks at it. Because you may say, yeah, this plan's great, but, and we want to make these changes. And then it would be staff's, task to make those changes and present to council the draft you feel comfortable with.
Okay. So could council then like, let's say council reviews this and they're like, well, what about this? Could it come back to us then?
I don't believe it would. I would need to maybe double check with our solicitor about that process. But I believe after you make the recommendation, it's out of your hands.
Okay.
Yeah, I can double check that for you, though.
Gotcha.
Any other comment from the commission? Okay, number 6, other business.
Me again, Mr. Chairman. So I'd received a couple of requests from planning commission members for an orientation of some sort. I have a brief presentation that focuses on zoning and land development, if we want to do that this evening. There's no pressure to. This is a standard presentation I had provided to City Council a couple of years back, and I know we have 2 members of the public. If we want to invite public participation in advance of that, if you want the presentation this evening, I think we can make it fairly brief. So I'll leave that up to you, Mr. Chairman, and the board and the commission.
Yeah, perhaps since it seems like we have a short agenda tonight, perhaps we can do that.
Okay. Would you like to invite public comment ahead of that, so we don't have to maybe make
Yes.
everyone wait through that?
Public comment? Could you go to the mic, please?
I'm curious about the comprehensive plan and whether
You
there's
state your
still-
name, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, Tony Israel. Whether there's still opportunity for public involvement, or I know that there's been a lot of that going on, but for those of us who didn't do that, like me, whether there's still opportunity to comment in any kind of way that can be digested and maybe influenced.
Certainly. I mean, so you could provide your thoughts now if you had them,
No,
formulated.
I'm just
but
curious whether, like, as
Yeah.
things go along, if the public comment, public
Yeah.
influence or whatever is done.
Sure. It is definitely not done. We've gone through 2 distinct phases here, but I think the third phase really is making that presentation to the community and inviting feedback. Most of that feedback will probably be received here before the commission. So you're actually in the right venue for whenever it is that you want to provide those comments or concerns that you have. I would invite you to watch these agendas, keep an eye out, and attend a future meeting. Even if it's not on the agenda, I welcome you to show up and share your thoughts here. If there are particular topics you're passionate about that you want to see represented in the plan, I think this is a great group of people to hear about that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Is there a website?
Oh, yes, thank you. I should have mentioned that. There is a project website, Tony. It's ourfuturelancaster.com. So if you go there, there's a number of different draft documents. We have our first engagement report on there, the community objectives that have been identified so far. Our Lancaster Today report is our existing conditions report about the city. And there's a variety of other things. You can also, email me directly if there's something you'd like to talk about specifically. Yeah, sure, no problem. Okay. Mindeli, if I either email you a link or I can navigate to it on the city's website, there's a presentation that's posted on the city's website that we can pull up. If you go to the Planning Bureau's webpage, so all the way to the bottom, there's documents and resources. Keep going down. Keep going, keep going, keep going, Keep going. Oh, wait, where did it go? Sorry, go. Ignore the picture, but keep going back. Oh, there it is. It's right above, yeah, there you go. Documents and resources above my picture. And then to the bottom right, there should be a presentation that says zoning, subdivision, and development presentation. And then you can, perfect. Okay, so we can go to the next page. So I just thought I'd give a quick overview of what does qualify as a subdivision land development. I'm sorry, I'm skipping ahead. So let's start with the MPC. The Municipalities Planning Code is the guiding document for planning work in Pennsylvania. And it establishes land use enabling laws that set up the process to accomplish, development. And it's supposed to be protecting, promoting the safety, health, and morals of the community. So what's in the MPC? It's a lot more than we're going to get into tonight, but you can see the first thing on there is comprehensive planning. So we can come back to that another night, and we can learn about what the MPC says about comp planning. I think that'd be good to do. You heard me mention the official map. We can also make that a part of a future presentation. So tonight I'd like to focus on the zoning and SALDO, or subdivision and land development ordinance. The ones that follow are related more or less to land development, plan development, joint planning. Legal appeals kind of covers a variety of things. So we'll focus in on zoning and SALDO this evening. So zoning, as simply as I could figure out how to state it, it is the regulation of land according to use and the bulk, height, and density of buildings. And it gets a little bit more complicated than that, and so I'll just describe some of the key players and get into the content. So City Council creates the legislation, zoning officer enforces legislation, the zoning hearing board provides exception to that legislation, and then the Planning Commission is the it makes recommendations for legislative changes. So this is, I think, a really great diagram that covers some of the very basics about design with zoning. So zoning is determining things like setbacks, building coverage, lot coverage, and height. All of these things are really supposed to add up to creating a better environment. These are laws that are supposed to help encourage greenery, help provide some deference to your neighbor's property so your building's not, looming over their backyard right at the property line, things like that. Of course, these kinds of design guidelines have also been used to be very restrictive for, who lives in a community as well, by requiring large lots or large houses, things like that. Next slide, thank you. So there are a lot of other contents to the zoning code. I've listed them here. The ones on the left I just talked about, but the ones on the right are added zoning districts. There's dwelling unit sizes, parking requirements, landscaping, and then provisions for non-conforming uses or structures. There's a special section for planned residential development, which, if you want to nerd out with me a bit, I'll tell you more about that, but it's essentially a land development option within zoning. And then, the rezoning process, floodplain regulation, and there's all kinds of other stuff there too. So this is a portion of our zoning map for the city and all of the districts that we currently have. So you can see they're broken out into really the three major categories you see in zoning is residential, commercial, industrial. And so we have our versions of that, and then institutional for hospital and criminal detention, and also conservation, which really is our parks and open spaces. Most of our residential districts, as you know, allow for a variety of commercial uses to take place in them. So people often are confused, why there are certain businesses in residential areas, or is my building zoned residential? We zone parts of the city by district, but you can have one use in one building and another use in another building. They just have to be compatible with those districts. So it gets a little confusing as to what the use of a building is and what the zoning district is. So approvals, our zoning officer gives by right approvals. He's doing constant checks on that. special exceptions are approved by the zoning hearing board. And those are really considered by right uses so long as they comply with certain standards. A couple of those standards would be you're providing all of your parking, you're not creating noise, odors, or vibration that would disturb your neighbors, that it's compatible with the general character of the neighborhood, other sorts of quality of life measures. And so long as you meet those, you're more or less guaranteed that use. Variances are actually deviations from the zoning code entirely. And then a conditional use we almost never see. These are reserved, I think, for only 2 uses in our zoning code. One is a convention center, and which we already have, and we likely won't have another one. And then the second use, I think, is an extremely large box store that we would almost never see in the city limits. Beyond that, all of the zoning approvals are provided by the zoning hearing board or officer. I mentioned special exceptions already. These are some of the examples. So these are uses that require a little additional scrutiny, maybe to make sure we're right-sizing them for the neighborhood. It allows public input from neighbors and is subject to conditions. Some examples there are conversion of a single family to multifamily in certain districts, certain home occupations, drinking establishments over certain sizes, and community gardens, interestingly. Variances, there are 2 kinds. There's a dimensional variance when you're looking for design relief, and then there's a use variance. The dimensional variance are typically from setbacks, height, density. A common example is you want to put a shed in your backyard, but you want to do it right at your fence line. Technically that's not allowed, so you have to get a variance from the rear yard setback. We also see a lot of lot coverage and building coverage dimensional variances if people are building more than they're allowed to do by right. And then use variances, pretty self-explanatory. These days we're seeing some use variances for we've seen a lot of requests for short-term rental use variances. That's a popular one these days, and occasionally some others. Conditional use is granted only by council. Oh, here we go. I have the square footage there. 150,000 square foot retail facility. So that's really large.
Maybe the mall?
Yeah, exactly. The mall. So that would require conditional use by council. Those have, very significant impacts. To amend the zoning ordinance, here's the typical process. And some of you have, actually, how many of you have been through the zoning amendment process with me? Do we have all new members at this point? Andrew, I think, had, yeah. Okay, this evening only Andrew. So an amendment process can be proposed by a governing body or a private interest. We've had residents submit zoning petitions in the past. City Council recommends to Planning Commission. LCPC is Lancaster County Planning Commission, and then the Lancaster Intermunicipal Committee. So LCPC reviews for consistency with their county plan, Places 2040, and the LIMC plan. And where did I miss the city? Oh, City Planning Commission recommends and offers comments. I skipped over that. That's an important one. And then the county also reviews. And then finally it goes to City Council for review, and there's a first and a second reading, and it's adopted. This process typically takes between 3 and 6 months, kind of depending on scheduling and how many sessions we need with Planning Commission. Let's see. Oh, yes, there's notice to landowner by record of first-class mail announcing the public hearing, post notice. Sorry, I haven't read this in a while. We do need to post notices. These are the public advertising requirements that are outlined in the municipality's planning code. So let me just pause there. Any general questions about zoning that I can answer?
Yeah, I got a question.
Okay.
So what was the process we went through when we were making those amendments like a handful of months ago?
Oh, yeah, earlier this year. So what we did is we formed a subcommittee here. it can be time consuming to dive deep on some of these regulations. So you all set up a subcommittee. We had 3 meetings. We actually ended up meeting, I think, at 4 or 5 planning commission meetings with public comment. And then we made a recommendation to city council. We also provided that draft to Lancaster County Planning Commission. They made their review as well. And eventually city council had a council committee meeting and 2 readings of the ordinance and voted to approve.
Okay.
Yeah, so that exact process that I outlined is what we followed and what we have to follow by law.
Okay.
Any other questions about zoning? All right, pretty straightforward, I guess. Devil's in the details. So subdivision land development, bit of a different animal, and I think these 2 are often confused. I'll abbreviate it SALDO, so I don't have to say subdivision and land development ordinance, but the SALDO, it aims to maintain reasonable and acceptable design standards and coordinate public improvements with private development interests. So you guys are much more experienced with this one. The SALDO objectives are really, 1, to contain city costs by requiring payment for improvements. If they damage the road during development, they should pave the road, things like that. If they have stormwater that they're creating, they should manage the stormwater. It also protects the municipality from problems and other costs that we might inherit. It ensures a decent quality of life for city residents. It also helps to attract investment in homes and businesses through quality built and natural environments. And finally, it coordinates the reviews among many entities. A lot of city staff, we probably have a dozen city staff that look at every land development plan, engineers and planners and historic preservationists and other folks. And then we also work with other local and state offices to get approvals too. Okay, key players. City Council, again, creates the legislation. Planning Bureau and Public Works are really the ones that are enforcers of that legislation. We're the ones reviewing for water, sewer, stormwater, zoning, waste, engineering, planning, housing. These are all the things that we coordinate with and land development plan. You all, Planning Commission, provide exceptions to that legislation and by way of modifications or waivers like we did this evening for McCaskey. And you also provide final approvals of subdivision and land developments. You all can also recommend changes to the ordinance to City Council, which I think the last time we did that with the subdivision land development was the end of 2020, I think, 2020 or 2021. I'm blanking now, yeah. And then LCPC, or Lancaster County Planning Commission, they provide advisory comments to us. And generally, you don't often see them because usually me and Mandeli receive those comments and we ask the developers to address them immediately. It's pretty rare that there's a comment that can't be satisfied before it gets to you all. But if it can't, it would generally become a condition of approval of ours. Typically, we're always waiting for their recommendations before you would see it for action. So the contents, there's a lot to the land development ordinance. It is definitely it is largely a process document and design document. So the process, it sets out the standards and timelines for processing plans. So this holds the city accountable, and it also creates predictability for the developer about how many days it's going to take to get an answer from us one way or the other. We have really 4 different kinds of plan submissions. A sketch plan is an informal submission. A minor plan is one you actually don't review or vote on. It's one that staff is able to process without you because they're typically smaller. And then there's preliminary and final land developments that are much larger. It sets administration and fees. I mentioned design standards. That's often what we're referencing for conditions of approval. Sidewalk has to be a certain width, curb has to be a certain height, there have to be street trees, stormwater, et cetera. There is a parks and open space requirement that can either be satisfied through the dedication of parkland or through private recreational space. Transportation impacts is another big one. We get traffic studies for most of the final land developments that we approve. Those get reviewed and incorporated into the conditions of approval sometimes. We look at light timing and pedestrian crossings, bike access as well. There may be other road designs that need to change. I'm trying to think of an instance. It might be that there needs to be an extra access point or a turning lane or something of that sort. Turning lanes are unusual. We like to eliminate those. But and then financial guarantee and inspection. We hold money or credit for all of the public improvements and some of the private improvements as well. Not the building, but really all of the land improvements. We can pull on that if necessary, if something is done incorrectly or if it's not done at all. So that's the leverage that the city holds after you all approve the plan. You know, Mendelli and I become the enforcers and inspectors. And in fact, recently we've hired CS Davidson, an engineering firm, who was doing some of our site inspections during construction to help keep developers on the right track. Here are some examples of the design standards. I think, again, you're familiar with many of these. Public rights-of-way improvements are a big one that we deal with. Safe ingress and egress for all users, including people walking and biking and rolling otherwise. Proper utility planning is a big one. Water and sewer capacity, connections to other public utilities, easements that might be necessary. And then lot design. Sometimes we get into questions about how a property gets subdivided, the orientation of the lot, the shape, recording deeds, providing access to the required parties, etc. So let's see, a couple of example projects. So one that would be subdivision and land development. For example, an adaptive reuse of an existing structure. Some of these I hope you know, but they're a few years outdated at this point. But the press building would be one example. There was very little earth disturbance or land movement there, but that building was large enough that when it was converted to residential, it required a land development plan. In addition to a non-residential structure, so this would be really any business that wanted to expand their footprint technically would be required to go through land development process in most cases. Rhodes Energy was a recent one that I did when we created this presentation. A new one might be the manufacturing facility that came to us on South Water Street, Creative Packaging. They wanted to do a small addition on their site, and you all ended up waiving that site plan requirement. A new multifamily structure, Stadium Row is a recent example. A new commercial building, large or small, Marriott Tower is an obvious example. And then subdividing a lot or adjusting lot lines. We've done a couple of subdivision plans here. And things that would not need to be processed according to our saldo would be interior renovations that don't create new spaces. So keep in mind the press room was a building that got divided up into many leaseholds, but an interior renovation that doesn't create new leaseholds doesn't. In addition to a single family home, not applicable by state law. Building a single family home, also not applicable by state law. And adding a residential accessory structure, like a shed or a garage, or creating an accessory dwelling unit that would also not be required to go through land development. So some, let's see. Did I already talk about this one? Is that a duplicate slide? Oh, sorry, that was zoning. This is, okay. I'm not sure why I designed that slide that way, but that is exactly what we talked about. And then resources. There's a great set of documents on DCED's website. This is the Department of Community and Economic Development by the state, and there's some great resources on there. They've got resources on zoning and saldo, on floodplain, on comprehensive planning, community planning, all kinds of things. So if you're curious, check out their library And there's also another resource I've offered in the past, and I don't remember the exact acronym. It's like Pennsylvania Municipal Planners Education Institute, PMPEI. They offer courses both online and in person, and I think some of us have attended those in the past. Yeah, yeah. So anytime the Planning Commission wants to attend trainings, if you identify trainings you want to attend, please let me know. We do keep budget for training. Typically, I'm offering those opportunities to you, but if there's one that you guys see and you're interested in, please let me know, okay? I think that's it. Any questions on subdivision and land development?
The shed, now you said, the shed could not be up against the property line, right?
It
What?
technically depends on the district.
Okay.
You could do it in the downtown because we allow basically zero setbacks. But in most other districts, you would technically need a setback or an agreement from your neighbor allowing you to put a shed directly on the property line.
Okay,
If it's adjacent to their property line. If it's at the back of your property and there's an alleyway there and you got relief for the setback, there would be no need for an agreement,
Right.
from an owner.
okay,
So, yeah.
all right.
So what if someone has a house or I'll just leave it, just keep it simple, a house. And they're like, wow, I have a massive house. Let me turn it into 2 separate apartments, essentially. Let's just say they're already permitted to do that. Do they have to go through Saldo then? Because it creates the opportunity for a new lease?
So when it becomes a multifamily structure, yes, technically they do.
Okay.
Yeah, and it might be that you all decide to waive that requirement of them. We've certainly had, I know in recent history, the commission's provided waivers for like 9 or 10 units in a building where there was no other land development activity. There was already a parking lot. It was a large office building or something, and they already had water and sewer, and they just wanted to divide up the interior into residential. They would qualify as a land development, but you may all waive that situation.
Gotcha. This might be a little weird, but since we did kind of talk about the comp plan earlier, I'm curious if form-based zoning is anything the city's considered going for. Like, I don't know a whole lot about form-based zoning, but I'm just curious about that tool and if we have potential to use it.
We certainly have the potential to use it. I think locally, there are a couple of municipalities that do that. I know Millersville, Borough, and the downtown adopted some form of form-based zoning. I think, yes, we can do it. It would require a full rewrite of the zoning ordinance to do that. And I think, I'm not speaking out of turn to say, the Planning Bureau would probably see a lot of benefits to adopting, some form-based strategies. What that tries to do, just for the broader Planning Commission, is it really designs or sets design guidelines by broad standards of the building design rather than focusing maybe on the use of the property or focusing more on creating a building and setting standards for operation. So, maybe I'm sort of being a little bit blunt here, but like do whatever you want in the building, but make it look good, make it fit the character of the neighborhood and the scale, and don't exceed these standards: noise, light, vibration, odors, these sorts of things. And if you do all of that, maybe you could have a small manufacturing area that doesn't have excessive truck traffic or noise or odors and exists in an otherwise mixed-use neighborhood or something. And then you can also maintain some of your historic forms across buildings. Right now we have our historical commission that does a lot of that good work, but form-based zoning in some ways would start to steer that a little bit more if we adopted it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. We haven't talked much, at least in the reviews that I've been a part of, about anything with floodplains. Is that just because the majority of the city is not in one, or it just doesn't come up as much?
Yeah, good question. It doesn't come up all that much, but there definitely are areas where we have floodplains. Yeah, if we're interested in learning more, really, that could be a whole separate session. Basically, the areas where we have floodplains that we regularly administer, the top one would be near, actually, there's an area that crosses Manheim Pike and Fruitville Pike, where there's, if you know where the Dillerville Swamp is, as people call it, that used to be a very large wetland system, and over the years it was drained and developed. And there's still a 100-year floodplain that runs through there and connects into part of the Longs Park stream system that then continues running west to the Little Conestoga. So that's an area where anytime there's development or earth disturbance, we're having to deal with floodplain regulations. The other area is really in the southeast of the city. There's not much development in that area, but that would include like Sunnyside, Franklin Terrace. Some of those buildings, those residential buildings, are in the floodplain. And actually, I think you all provided a waiver for like tiny cottages on Sunnyside. That was a gentleman who was actually perching buildings above the floodplain, but he was driving pillars basically at the edge of the floodplain. So he was finding some unique ways to kind of work around the floodplain. Let's see, Mandela, I think, is pulling it up. There you go. So you can see it doesn't really touch a lot of the developed portion of the city. Is this the 500-year floodplain? Okay, so there's many types of floodplains, but the very basic breakdown would be 100 and 500 year. And the theory is, every 100 years approximately this area might flood. And the 500 year, there's very few regulations attached to, but the 100 is more significant. And in most cases, you have to build a foot above the elevation of that floodplain. And it would need to be flood-proofed if you were to build in the floodplain. It gets a little bit more complicated. Mandela, can you go north on the plan? I just wanted to show them that area of Manheim, Fruitville, Pikes. Yeah. Yeah, so it's actually both Manheim Township and the city there, but you can see how that it's kind of a stream system really that runs southwest, and then into Longs Park, and then connects across the street. Yeah, so also I'll say that the Planning Commission, while you would recommend changes to the floodplain ordinance, you wouldn't typically administer it. The zoning hearing board hears appeals for zoning for floodplain.
I don't mind asking the Christmas tree.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at this map, it did make me think about where Giant used to be on Reservoir, and that tiny little square that is not the city, right? And then also across from the train tracks, that same idea up by the train station. Mm-hmm. Is that always going to be that way?
I hope not.
I know that's just like, it's so strange.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you zoom in on that little square on the Reservoir Street Square? I'm kind of curious. I've actually never looked at that one before. Go south a little bit, Mandeli, please. Further south. Yeah, that to the bottom right there.
Broad Street.
Oh, it's a portion of Broad Street. Walnut.
I thought it was part of where the Chinese restaurant was. I didn't realize it was that block.
I have never noticed that before. I learned something new. Yeah. So yeah, those are unfortunately incompleted annexations. Property owners used to need to opt in to annexation by the city, and those laws changed sometime in the early 70s or something. It's kind of when we stopped seeing annexations. And now it's just politically difficult to accomplish. I know there are a couple people exploring this idea right now. Pieces of Lancaster Township or Manheim Township or the city that could be traded. Tax revenues are involved in that, and it gets complicated.
With everything, I often wonder, like, what was the mindset when these lines were drawn originally, you know?
The man who knows the most about that is probably Benton Weber, if you know who he is. He has a keen interest in this and has been doing a lot of research. So.
Ben Weber is actually also a really great resource to talk to for the water systems as well, not just the awkward political boundaries. He's literally like a wealth of knowledge.
A wellspring. Any other questions about zoning or land development at this time? Okay, great. Thank you for your attention and your questions. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Guess we're finished. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I'll make a motion to adjourn the Lancaster City Planning Commission meeting on Wednesday, November 16th.
Second.
We have a motion and a second at 7:23. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none, motion carried. Meeting finished. Adjourned.